Hi, everybody. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes because we have a few more people registered than we see online right now. We'll start in a couple minutes.
Hello?
Hi, we're here. We're just waiting a couple minutes for a few more people to sign in.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so good morning or afternoon or evening to everyone, whatever time zone you're in. One of the exciting things about this working group, bringing together the global zones. We're going to start the webinar now. I'm Natalie Harrower. I'm Director of the Digital Repository of Ireland. I'm one of the co-chairs of the group, chairing the editorial team. So we'll get started. This is our first slide. Everything that we reference, you can find links to it from that link that you see on the title page. Okay. Oops. So just in terms of what we'll talk about today, the overview, we'll briefly go over the overview of the aims of the working group, make sure that we're all on track and remind people that may be new. Talk about what the highlights were of the third release, which went out last Friday, the 8th of May, and the request for comment function. Give an update on our current processes and what's upcoming. And then we'll hear subgroup updates in terms of what they've been working on. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer session. So you can put questions into the question box that you see there on GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar at any point. Some of them will be answered by the co-chairs and co-moderators on the call directly, and then others, if they're a little more complicated, we can address verbally at the end, but the question feature is there for you. Okay, so in terms of the aims of the working group, of the overall COVID working group, it's to define detailed practical guidelines on data sharing under the present COVID-19 circumstances. So we're really trying to get down to implementable, actionable guidelines that can maximize best practices and promote the efficiency of data sharing and the impact of their work. Alongside that, also to develop higher level guidelines or recommendations, we should say, for policymakers and funders to help enable this and maximize the timely data sharing capabilities and appropriate responses in this and future health emergencies as well. And you're going to see when we talk about the structure of the upcoming releases that we've incorporated these two sections from release 4 onward. So in terms of what each of the sub-working groups are doing, it reflects these overall aims. Of course, they're working on best practice guidelines in their particular area, but also elements that can be shared overall across the groups, recommendations as well for policymakers. Then there's also a catalog of key resources that can help to inform these guidelines. So that can include, as you see there, data sets or journal articles, repositories, etc. And then the final stage is a tool, a kind of navigation tool or decision tree tool to help stakeholders find what they're looking for, to point them in the right direction as they go through this longer document. So just a few highlights of the third release that went out. We've been following the same structure for the first three releases. So the one that went out on Friday, you're going to hear more detail about these from each of the subgroups. The clinical section had considerable revisions. The community participation group created a use case, which is, I think, a nice addition to a longer document like this on mobile app development for community-generated data. Epidemiology had major revisions and additional content. There were updates and additional data types added to the omics group, updates for social sciences, updates for software as well as additional sections, and then major revisions in legal and ethical. And I think this reflects the process overall. We get some major updates from some groups certain times and then tweaks other times. So I think this process is working quite nicely at different paces. We also incorporated feedback that was received through the request for comment process, and that's part of the website. That goes directly to co-chairs, moderators, and the editorial team. And then document itself, you can find it as always published on the RDA website. There's a link to it there. If you're on the main group page, you can go to outputs to find that. Just a little bit about the request for comments feature. This is a function for specific feedback that's built into the RDA website. We're looking for general comments at this stage. Anything about gaps in the document, things that are missing that should be addressed, considerations for that sort of thing. You can put them in through the comments directly, or you can upload an attachment. We added that feature because some people like to comment directly in a version of the document on various aspects, and that's very helpful as well. So thank you for the comment that's come in so far, and please do encourage networks you're in to continue this. We will have a longer comment phase when the last release goes out, but these are very helpful in the meantime. And the process is that the editorial team is looking for comments that can be incorporated into the overarching and introductory sections, but moderators of each of the groups should continue to look as well in that comment area for things that are related to their sections. And a lot of those doing comments have been very specific and numbering them well, so you can figure out where they go. The request for comments feature, you can find that linked from those guidelines at that link there. This is just a bit of a diagram to show you if you haven't used the request for comments before. You have to be logged in to the website for this through your username and password. You go to the RDA COVID's outputs page, scroll to the very end, and then you can enter your comments there or upload the notes via the attachment feature by clicking save to submit it. So as I mentioned earlier, we've had a similar structure to the first three releases of the document. Now we're trying to rework that and move towards a final structure that allows us to maintain the kind of individuality and unique inputs of the different groups that are specific to their areas. So there isn't, entirely one size fits all, but at the same time, we are looking for more kind of cohesiveness and coherence across the document and a structure that will allow something like a navigation tool to help you find your way through it. So on the left-hand side here, just a few highlights of the changes to the structure. There's a more condensed or reworked introduction, an effort to pull more of the text that really fits in an overarching kind of way, commonalities we see being repeated by groups into the foundational recommendations part. The suggestion is to change the title for each of the sections to focus on the area of research. Instead of naming it by working group, you name the area that working group is contributing to. a decision that all references will go to the end of the document. So for now, they've been separated out, but we're pulling all of those together, so there'll be one longer list. There was a decision, and Mark wrote a very helpful email to support the excellent guidelines that Claire Austin's been creating around Zotero. So the decision is that all references that are to be in this document in the releases going forward have to be in Zotero. And there's a link there in the slides to the guidelines document that Claire's put together. It's very clear, and there's links within that document to other aspects of getting set up in Zotero if you haven't done that before. We'll also have an attribution page together that will list co-chairs, editors, moderators, and also contributors. And we'll have a bit of a discussion about that with the co-chairs and moderators about how that is best to put together. But we think at this point that a simple listing of names and ORCID IDs is best, and that keeps as close to the regular RDA processes as we normally follow. If you just move your eyes to the top right of that slide, you can see an example of what the structure will look like for each of the individual sections. So here we're using clinical medicine as an example. There's a focus and description section and a statement of scope, what's in, what's not in scope for this area. They're meant to be relatively concise. And then a split into two ways of delivering your outputs. So one is higher level policy recommendations for funders and governments. And then the next is guidelines. So we've called this a recommendations and guidelines document from the beginning. So we're creating a structure that follows that to allow for easier navigation by stakeholders. And so the guidelines part is more directed at researchers or data stewards. These are the more actionable types of things. That new structure is being reworked. We're going to release it probably very soon after this webinar today. And then everything going forward will be done through that structure. And there'll be some work by the working groups to tweak the efforts that have been made to put things into that structure. So we appreciate your efforts and your patience on that to get all of this together into one document. Coming towards the end of my intro here, so we've got an updated timeline responding to some questions on the webinar last week and some feedback we've had. Tried to make this more detailed, very clear about when deadlines, time exactly falls into place. So as I said, we're going to send around the newly structured document today. Thursday, 10 p.m. UTC is the deadline for the sub-working groups to finish their sections for the 4th release using the new document form. We're actually in the process of creating separate Google Docs for each of you to work in with the new structure, but we'll send around a PDF of the whole thing so that you can have sight of that as well. We thought having every, potentially 400 people working in one document was a little bit much. So we'll pull from those individual newly restructured Google Docs. So information on that will come to you. The 4th release will be posted this Friday. And then the deadline for the sub-working groups to finish sections for the 5th release is on the 21st of May. And then there's a series of other deadlines in there for there to be editorial work, releasing it for comments. So we have a 10-day comment period that we intend to close on the 8th of June. And then we've worked in some time there to incorporate that community feedback, finalize the document, send it to the RDA groups for endorsement, etc. And what this brings us to is a release of the final endorsed document on the 30th of June. Okay, so now we're moving on to updates from the subgroups. We've moved the order of things around a little bit to keep it exciting. One thing I'll just point out is that we've moved the slides that kind of introduce all of the groups and who's moderating them and links to all of their documents They are still in this slide deck, but they're not going to be presented during the webinar. We're trying to move more quickly to the updates, so you can find those at the end later. Okay, so the first one is epidemiology, and I think we've got Claire, if you'd like to take over.
Yes, so thank you very much. Good day and night, everybody. So the epidemiology work group, we have reorganized the recommendations and guidelines under 246 subheadings, some of which are general in nature and some of which are specific to epidemiology. Next slide, please. So the main thrust, I think, of the epidemiology work is, number one, we are proposing an epidemiology surveillance data model. We have a section on anonymization and pseudonymization, including an example, some examples. We are looking for identifying, actively developing COVID-19 questionnaire initiatives is a very active field at this moment. And we are also proposing a model domain and cohort specific COVID-19 question bank to facilitate frictionless flow of information during the pandemic. This is related to number 3 above. And finally, we are proposing a WHO-led COVID-19 EpiTrack, Epidemiological Translational Research Action Coalition, which includes also a rapid response early warning team. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to you.
Super, thanks very much, Claire. Okay, now we have community participation, and I believe we have Tamaya there to present today.
Yes, thank you, Natalie. So the latest release from the community participation subgroup regarded a use case on the data challenges related to app development for community-generated data. The document has been divided into major topics regarding transparency and community participation, and it also addressed the various phases of the data management lifecycle. More in detail, it looked into issues around community participation, but also achieving a balance between efficient contact tracing and community safety alongside individual privacy, rapid and timely collection versus data quality and reliability, retention periods versus the case of the high value data for future pandemics modeling, which is the case of the current context. It also provided, looked into recommendations for harmonization of data across different information systems and ethical and legal considerations regarding the two-way exchange sharing of information, which is the case in most of the apps for community-generated data. For our next slide, please. So our next, I don't know.
Sorry, this slide.
Okay. Yes, there's a little bit of an overlap. So for our next release, we have run a community vote to select the topic for the second use case, and the winner has been the topic of data challenges in participatory disaster response strategies. And this is the topic that we're going to address for our second use case. I remind everyone that the community participation subgroup has decided to provide the initial recommendations, so a set of recommendations around community participation in general, and then try to drill down into specific use cases where these recommendations can be more clearly highlighted. And that's our approach for the upcoming period. Further comments and of course welcome and feedback are still open for the initial recommendations document as well as for the use case that has been released. And we have a couple of links there that you can follow. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tamaya. Now we'll move on to the social sciences group, and I think we have Irina here.
Yes, thanks, Natalie. Hello. A couple of updates from social sciences. We started digging into the details to come up with practical guidelines for researchers in social sciences. So in this current release, we included an actionable section about data management plans, and we'll be working this week on adding some more specific recommendations. And our next writing sprint is tomorrow, 12 p.m. UTC, and connection link is on our subgroup page. And would like to thank everyone who already provided feedback and comments. We will include this feedback into the release of this week. Next slide, please. We also started working on a series of use cases in collaboration with Legal and Ethics subgroup. And we already have 3 real user stories that address challenges of data sharing in social sciences, and we'll use those use cases and user stories for producing next version of guidelines, and we'll have a call for adding more stories. You can see them already in this Google Doc, and we'll send out an email about that. So we expect a major update this week, and thanks again to everyone who collaborated with us.
Thanks very much, Irina. We'll move on to the update from Omics. We have Rob here.
Yes, hello. Yeah, Omics has been continuing with in the 3rd week with the similar process to the first 2 weeks. We have in the 3rd release added more guidelines on more different topics, but we think that with the 5 headers that we have right now, we were going to be completing that list. So we had virus genomics and host genomics already from the first time. The second time, structural data were added, and there was a frame for proteomics and metabolomics. This time we added the specific section on lipidomics because it's so important for this virus. We also have now 2 separate sections already in tree, and we're very curious to see how the proposal for number 4 is looking, where the recommendations for publishers, funders, resource providers, and policymakers have been separated out. We incorporated 2 of the comments from that came in through the rest 4 comments so far, and we're really looking for participation. So that's the last point on this slide. Number 5, when that goes public, we actually plan to ask all the linked resources that we are linking to for their input to make sure that they feel they are rightly represented. On our second slide, you will see the call for the next Omics group meetings, and we decided to throw the week a little bit in a different order. We used to have our meetings on Thursdays, but now we decided that it's better to go quickly with the restructuring of the document and discuss with the whole volunteer group how we can actually discuss the transition to the new document structure, and also prepare this contacting of the resources when the final draft is done. And there will also be a Pacific time zone touch base for those people who cannot make it in a few hours for their time zone. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Rob. Okay, we'll move on to one of the overarching groups, the legal and ethical. And we have Brian here.
Thanks, Natalie. So this last week, there was a lot of progress in pulling the document together and adding in additional resources and information to help researchers and other stakeholders. The structure of the document at the moment, of course this will change, looks at the overarching principles of the general framework within which to consider legal and ethical issues, a set of obligations. So on the one hand, we have the legal issue, particularly around data protection, but also the ethical principles to guide researchers. Then a section on looking for guidance and where to find that guidance, especially within an institutional context within a pandemic. And we've started to increase the list of resources. So the basic idea is to provide a set of principles and recommendations to the different stakeholders. In addition, and I've spoken directly because I'm part of that subgroup as well, to the social science group. Anne and Alexandra have been talking to other groups about gathering information and requests from them, their requirements around legal and ethical issues, which will, if we get them in time, we'll put into this sprint. The next slide, please. So we've started to look at the suggested new structure. Obviously this week we have to deal with the transition and pick out the recommendations specifically for policymakers and funders. We are finalising the set of resources, and thank you to Claire for taking us through an introduction on how to use Zotero. We've added a new section, or we've started to talk about a new section on anonymization. I noticed that epidemiology and the clinical areas have been looking at this as well as consent. But we need input from the other groups as soon as possible so that we can think what we can actually contribute to those. And the final piece of work, which will probably be after the this current writing sprint, will be around the decision trees. So we've started to look at a format to gather information and then how that will help to guide people to the different stakeholders, so the different roles that people have to help them through the information that we've provided and how they can move forward to access the kinds of resources and recommendations as well as the policy documents that are out there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Okay, and now moving on to another one of the cross-cutting groups, research software, and we have Fotis.
Yeah, hi everyone. So an update for the research software subgroup. Right now, the third release has three main subsections. The one is for policymakers and funders, the other one is for publishers, and the last one is for researchers. The policymakers' recommendations have been directly updated from the second version. We thought that the concepts that were discussed there in the guidelines should also refer to funders if possible. So this has been updated. We also considered that publishers can have a significant impact in terms of research software. So we added a new set of recommendations that are directly tailored to publishers. The guidelines and practices for researchers have been restructured, and we took into consideration all comments from the working group contributors over the past week. To this end, we also included a lot of the information that was originally in the long version of the same document, in order to ensure that the final text that is going to be included in the report is going to be concise and specific enough for people to follow. And also there is a first draft, both as text as well as an actual tree representation of a navigation tree for the researcher practices. The title of the reviews in this context was a good enough practice for software to help others trust your analysis. but this is something also ongoing. Next slide, please. In terms of moving towards the fourth release, and as was discussed already, the main effort will be to merge those three sections into a single document. We will also try to restructure the recommendations for the researchers in order to make a more relevant process compared to the actual analysis of data. We will also try to ensure by the fourth release that all the recommendations for the high-level recommendations for policymakers, funders, and publishers are directly cross-linked to the respective guidelines of the researchers in the form of, if you, for the researchers, if you follow this guideline, you will also be adhering to the requirement that policymakers will be having, and vice versa, having a guideline for a policymaker that you should be supporting this because this will also facilitate the adoption of this particular recommendation for researchers. And finally, in order to complement the navigation tree for the researcher guidelines, we're also preparing a navigation tree for the policymakers in the same context. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Fotis. And now we have Dawe is there for clinical. He's going to give us an oral report.
Yes, actually, maybe I modified a different folder. We have a slide, but that's okay. So for clinical group, we want to take advantage of the last opportunity that to move to the final structure. So we have the largest content expansion last week, and now we have 5 big sections, and then the recommendations we're focused on are mainly based on there's some other community-based standards. We're trying to right now not taking too much into consideration of the one-off recommendations. For example, that if a recommendation just coming from one publication without community discussions, we're trying to kind of give the low priority for that. If there's some recommendation already have the community discussions, like made into the standards and or some consortium discussions, and now we're trying to pull them in. And then right now, I think so we have the consent, clinical trials, the overview of those aspects, and then put a lot of contents in sharing clinical data, which is this working group is trying to do. The other thing I think I want to mention is that we added other types of data category. Right now, mainly is about immunological data and then imaging data. That's the 2 types of data that we had a call last week to call for experts, and we did have a lot of suggestions, and thanks very much. However, we still need more. I think we have some guidelines for immunological data, but we still need some help on the imaging data. And we follow up some suggestions about reaching out to imaging data expert, and it was interesting. I think the feedback I got is from some NIH experts is that there is not a overarching guidelines for imaging data sharing, and that's interesting. Is that I think this question for the group is that, do we want now add some preliminary recommendations, or we can put out in the recommendations that this area needs some development. So So I think that's kind of the update from the clinical group, and I welcome our other co-moderators to jump in. I think just close my section is that we still want to help to go to our recommendations to see if there's some more contents need to be in. We want to be as comprehensive as possible before the next release, and also if there other people have additional thought about the imaging data, and please let us know.
Okay, thanks very much, Dawei. We'll make sure that the slides that are uploaded include the updates that you had there. Okay, so we actually have moved through this webinar quite quickly this week, which gives us a bit more time for questions and answers. You've got the question box that you can type things into there. I don't see anything there at the moment, but oops, move the slide. But I think we can also have a couple of people speak if we have time for that. You can raise your hand, I think. Oh, okay, so we have one raised hand here with Sofia Cosida. There you go.
Thank you. I'm quite new at this, so I have a question that might have already been addressed at your previous webinars. I heard at the beginning that you were talking about different tools that they are being accessed through a platform and that they have recommendations for them. I was wondering if there is a procedure and how we could look into adding tools that they might be relevant to this community, please.
I think that was maybe the slide where we were pointing to the Zotero database, I believe. But if there's somebody else on the call who wants to respond to that.
May I try to respond to that? This is Fotis.
Hi, Fotis.
Regarding tools that are relevant to a clinical context or to analyzing data, I think the most relevant subgroups right now would be the omics or the clinical ones. But in those cases, my understanding is that there is not an explicit listing of tools that support such analysis. There is an ongoing discussion within the subgroup, so I'm sure that Rob can sort of jump in here if I'm misrepresenting this. From the software perspective, we are definitely avoiding specifically listing tools because this will basically resolve down to why this tool and why not the other one, and how can you ensure that this tool is actually sufficient and so forth. So this is a whole a larger discussion. So in the software, from the software side, when for the practice that actually support high quality and open and fair software for people to use. I'm not really sure if I've directly answered the question.
You mentioned Rob. I'm not sure, Rob, if you wanted to follow up on that or.
Yeah, I can. I'm completely agreeing with what Fotis said. I think for many of the data resources, I think there is a consensus about what the added value of certain data resources over others are. There is less competition, let's say, and there's a lot of benefit in concentrating the data in a few well-regarded data repositories. For tools, actually, analysis there is much less consensus about which tool you should use, and actually it is quite useful to have different analysis using different tools for their work, so that you can avoid making the same mistake, and also to make sure that the greatest variety of analysis are actually being undertaken. There is no real competition there. It's just for some analysis there may be other tools that are more suitable than for other analysis, and we want as to support as many different analysis as possible.
Thank you very much. This is clear. Thank you.
Just a final point. Again, my apologies, I'm misrepresenting. So beyond tools, another point that was sort of discussed was about annotation and standards. So these, especially if they are widely adopted standards and annotation tools, annotation platforms, I think some of them have been included in the recommendations just because they are universally and widely accepted standards and annotation processes. Again, if I'm miscommunicating this information or misunderstanding communication, please feel free to correct me.
Okay, thanks for that. We have another hand up, Martin. So you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Martin Golubieski from Germany, and I wonder. So, I mean, in June there is this this final version planned. But I mean, in these documents that are circulating now in the subgroups, there are a lot of recommendations that go way beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, and so I wonder what is planned for follow-up, or how is it planned after this June deadline?
Natalie, would you like me to answer that?
I was muted. Oh, go ahead, Hilary.
Yeah, so thanks, Martin. I'm Hilary, I'm the Secretary General of the Research Data Alliance. And so after June, Martin, well, we will discuss with the groups after we've put them through their paces on the 4th and 5th release as to how they would like to proceed. The normal processes and procedures around Research Data Alliance working in interest groups haven't been applied in this case, as it was a fast-track response. Our groups last as long as they are necessary or until they have provided their deliverables. So I think we will discuss with the subgroup moderators and co-chairs and understand when they feel their work is done, or how, if they would like to transform it into something more stable or focus the efforts onto something else. So I think we focused a lot on what is happening now to ensure to get the guidelines out by the end of June and have them endorsed through the process that RDA applies. Also, of course, there is the decision tree navigation tool that will come after that. It won't come at the end of June. So there'll be some work to do on that too.
Yeah, I'm also, if I may have a follow-up question or explanation of how I meant this, because I think many of the recommendations are done in a really ad hoc way, which is good for this acute situation here. But they might need, I think, on a longer run, a bit refinement, and if they might be used also in another context. I think most of the recommendations can be also transferred easily to other life science data types, not COVID-19 related. And this refinement, I think that might be an interesting step after the final release.
Yeah. No, we agree. And interestingly, actually, one of our co-chairs, before all of this happened, but Priyanka had, if we had have had our meeting in Melbourne, one of the new proposals for a group was around this topic, but for public health emergencies. And of course, yes, we've taken the COVID-19 context, but it's true that a lot of the content we would hope would be useful for that. But as I said, that's up to the groups, I think, themselves to decide, because the momentum and the effort gone into this so far has been phenomenal. And I'm not sure that anyone would be able to keep up the pace. But it's important that we do that. It's also true, Martin, just that to clarify, I think Natalie explained it well at the beginning, but you'll see quite a significant change to the document, particularly on the 28th of May, which is the almost final version that we expect. So this week's version has a change in structure, but there'll be significant editorial work from all sides, and that will refine it, because we do realize it's a very rich and content-rich document, but it to make it actionable, of course, and implementable and useful, there'll be some work to do on it.
Thanks, Hilary. I don't see any other hands up or questions in the box. Were there any of the co-chairs or moderators want to add anything at this point? Okay.
Natalie, this is Dawei. I think I want to add another comments that when I talked to the imaging experts, I think at least the people I talked to that indicated that community do have the large databases, like, you know, and repository have been running for more than a decade. They do not have the recommendations for the community to see how you share that data. So I'm wondering if the recommendations that we the entire working group is working on need also have a session for like the more like well-known resources for each community.
Well, I think what we've been trying to do is move the shape of the document to kind of separate out the higher level things from those more direct ones as well. And I think that the subgroups, if they have sections like that they want to include, that would make sense. But we could discuss further how that might look, I suppose, on the call.
Okay.
Okay, last chance for final comments. I'm giving space because we have a bit of time.
Yes, it's Claire here.
Hi, Claire.
Hi. So I'm running 2 Zotero library meetings every day this week. And I'm sorry I didn't get the notice sent out. But I'll do that shortly, and the secretariat can put it in the events. Today, both meetings will be looking at tagging.
Hi, Claire. Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay, you cut out there for a second.
Oh, so today's Zotero meetings will be looking at tagging, both of the meetings, and then there'll be 2 meetings every day for the rest of the week.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
I just need to send out the schedule.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm pausing just to see if anybody's having trouble unmuting, but I think we've come to the end of the webinar. We will have a next webinar. We actually have a break, so there won't be one next week, but then there'll be one on Tuesday, May 26th at 11 a.m. UTC at the same time. And as I mentioned before, if you continue on in this slide deck, we've now put into the annex a lot of useful links, names of people to contact, contributors, etc. So they're still in the slide deck that'll be uploaded. And at this point, I'd just like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank everyone who presented today, to all the co-chairs and moderators that have been part of these calls, and of course to the really numerous energetic contributors that are shaping this incredibly important document from all of your different areas of expertise. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
If anyone knows how to stop the recording, please do.
It's okay, I'll do that, Natalie.
Thanks. Okay.
Just
Bye.
letting everyone say goodbye.